Okay, so I was able to get a replacement horizontal stabilizer. The manufacturer was very easy to work with. I also got some stick-on white covering film, so what I was going to do with the iron-on stuff, I should be able to do with this. I am afraid this is going to be a little bit heavier than the iron-on stuff, but it is what it is. So you can see here that the old horizontal stabilizer, despite my best efforts to try and straighten it out, has shrunken a little bit in every single dimension. So it's actually a little bit smaller now than the original. So we definitely needed to get a replacement for that. At this point I'm going to go ahead and see about sticking on some of the fabric on this. Okay, so I had a bit of a tripod malfunction there, so I didn't capture the whole covering process, but this has turned out a lot better. I did still use my heating iron to iron the edges to get them to roll over, so that's similar to traditional fabric, but it did cover a lot more nicely than the traditional fabric was doing. So that's the bottom side covered. I don't know that I'm going to film the entire covering process because it's pretty repetitive, but basically I'm just taking the sticky material, the sticky fabric, putting it on top of the surface, tacking it down, and then coming over the edges with the iron and just rolling the fabric. So that's the bottom. Going to do the top and see how that turns out. Okay, so that's the horizontal stabilizer covered, and it turned out reasonably well. There are still wrinkles to the fabric, but that's just the nature of the stick-on kind of fabric. That's why I really wanted to try and use traditional fabric, but it just doesn't work with the 3D printed material. I do want to reiterate, though, at this point that I am doing this slightly out of order. When it comes to the instructions that were provided with the airplane, it kind of has you assemble the entire thing before covering it. I think it's just easier to cover these individual parts separately and then glue the airplane together. So you notice here that I have some exposed area here for gluing the horizontal stabilizer to the bottom of the fuselage. Normally that would already be glued, and then you would be applying the fabric outside of that. So it was a little bit tricky. You have to figure out, you know, how much open space you need for gluing before you apply the fabric if you do it this way. But that's where we're at. Covering is going reasonably well. I'm going to probably, I don't know if I'll actually film the covering or not, but like I said, I'm doing something a bit unique. I'm going to be using the white fabric to cover large portions of the airframe. Then I'm going to be using the orange to cover certain sections. So it's going to look completely different than a traditional ugly stick. So that's the plan. I'm going to continue with the process here. And here's just some quick progress. You can see that I've got the vertical stabilizers, whereas the horizontal covered, and I've also covered the rudder. So we are making progress here. And we've started covering the bottom of the fuselage now, and you can see I've started adding some of the orange as well now. Table is starting to become a bit of a mess, but I think you can see now that I've got the bottom and sides of the fuselage covered, that this is definitely not going to be a traditional ugly stick style scheme. And I've started adding a little bit of the black, so that can kind of give you an idea of where the color scheme's going. So I decided to start covering the wing. The bottom side is going fairly well. The top side, not necessarily so much. The wingtips are particularly wrinkled, and I really don't have a good way to deal with this. This material does shrink a little bit with heat, but not nearly enough for the complex curves going over the wingtip. So that might just be how it's going to have to look. So the bottom of the wing is coming along nicely. You can see I've got the trim going on here finally. I did cut out a center section for the wires, and that brings me to the servos. I am going to have to start installing the servos before I cover the top of the wing so that I can run the power cables that go to the servos. These are the servos I've chosen. These are some cheap Amazon specials. I went with these because of the weight. These are 2.5 grams, so they're very light, and hopefully I'll be able to affix these in, but I'm going to start working on that now before I get to covering the top of the wing. So a little more progress. We've got the servos in the wing. We got the wing covered. Now I got to get the push rods going to the rear surfaces and get the servos in the fuselage installed. In fact, I might just go ahead and finish the electronics here, get that situated, and then finish covering it. Now I suppose since I'm about to start installing them that I should go over the electronics. This is the motor that I'm going to be using. You can see the specifications there on the side, a little bit over 1400 kV, APC prop. This is an E-flite ESC. It's so old that I don't know what the specs are anymore. It's been used in at least half a dozen experimental models in the past. And for a radio receiver I have an Orange RX. Now I know it doesn't look like an Orange RX. That's because I took the housing off. This was several grams worth of weight I was able to save by taking that off and just putting heat shrink on it. So that's an Orange RX unit. And of course I already showed you the 2.5 gram servos. So that's the electronics going in. All in, pretty close to 80 grams worth of electronics. So I think that I'm probably going to end up busting the 250 gram limit with this, but again, I wanted to make it look at least halfway decent. And even as it is, that's going to be difficult to do. Alright, so progress report. I have the electronics installed. I've got all the control surfaces installed. I've got the motor installed, which by the way, I had to cut the slits a little bit further to get this motor on. Turns out this motor is a little bit oversized for this airframe. As is the battery. As is the prop. This is a 9-inch prop, 9 by 3.8, and I do not have ground clearance with this prop. So I've had to order a different prop. I'm going to go with a 3-blade 7-inch prop with a 3.7 pitch, so it's still going to have some good slow performance, but I'm going to have to go with a slightly less efficient 3-blade and a smaller battery because the battery compartment is just not big enough for the what I thought was a small 1000 milliamp battery. But I am tired of dealing with it at this point, and I was going to save this till the very end of the project, but at this point I'm going to have to wait for some more parts to come in. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the surprise now. I've made some custom decals for the aircraft, so I'm going to go ahead, get these stuck on, and show you what it looks like with the decals on.